Picture a cold February morning in 1970. A man walks into a British car showroom, looks at a neat, four-door family saloon with a starting price of £766, and drives home thinking he has just bought the most sensible, ordinary car in Britain. And he is completely right, and completely wrong. Because beneath that thoroughly reasonable exterior sat a machine that was quietly doing things no other British family car of its era had ever done before. A car that wore at least 5 different names across 4 different continents, that smashed a factory-fresh Ford Escort Mexico in a straight road test, that won Britain's most prestigious motor racing title 3 times in 4 years, and that kept rolling off production lines somewhere in the world until around 1990 or 1991. Nearly a decade after the British factory that built it had been shut down and the brand name that created it had been wiped from history. And the truly extraordinary thing is that almost none of that story has ever been properly told. So here are 7 genuine secrets about the Hillman Avenger that the history books have largely overlooked. And by the time you reach the end of this, you will never look at a 1970s British family saloon the same way again. The first secret is one of those things that sounds almost too good to be true, but every major automotive historian who has studied this car attests to it. The Hillman Avenger was one of the first production cars in the world to have its bodyshell engineered using computer-aided design, or CAD. The idea of feeding design data into a computer to calculate stress points and structural strength was genuinely groundbreaking when the Roots Group's team set out to build the structure of this everyday family car in 1966. At the time, most British automakers relied on the human hand, the ruler, and the experienced eye. This is why it matters more than it might seem. In 1970, Roots engineered a low-cost family saloon with a reinforced passenger compartment flanked by front and rear crumple zones and strengthened windscreen glass. True early crash safety. And drove it to work every day with men who had no idea they were sitting inside a quietly revolutionary piece of engineering history. But here is the detail that makes you stop and think all over again. Because secret number 2 is about something you can see with your own eyes on the front of every early Avenger, that plastic radiator grille. And while a plastic grille might sound like a cost-cutting shortcut, it was actually anything but. Because the Avenger's one-piece plastic front grille, measuring 4 feet and 6 inches wide, was not just a first for any British car. It was, at the time of launch, claimed to be the single largest mass-produced plastic component in the entire European motor industry. And the reason Roots pushed to achieve this was partly about reducing weight, partly about cutting production costs, and entirely about pushing against the boundaries of what British manufacturing knew how to do, and it is exactly the kind of small, overlooked detail that tells you something important about the genuine ambition that lay behind what appeared from the outside to be a perfectly plain and sensible saloon. To comprehend secret number 3, you must visualize the all-iron overhead valve engine that sits beneath the Avenger's hood. If you are familiar with automobiles, the words overhead valve, all-iron, and completely unremarkable will probably make you think of something modest, outdated, and completely unremarkable. However, this reaction completely ignores something that the Avenger's engineers purposefully included because they position the camshaft unusually high within the block, resulting in a lighter and stiffer engine than an inexpensive pushrod family sedan. Viva sensed it as soon as they set foot on a clear road. The iron engine had a genuine willingness and enthusiasm that produced a driving experience that the modest specifications just did not promise. This is the exact kind of engineering intelligence that is quietly forgotten when a car fades from the public consciousness. What most people never realized, and this is secret number 4, is that the Avenger lived a completely hidden second life, wearing names that most British car fans would never in 1,000 years connect back to their familiar Hillman, because from 1971 onwards, the very same car that British families loaded with luggage for a trip to the seaside was simultaneously rolling off production lines in Brazil as the Dodge 1800 and later the Dodge Polara, in Argentina as the Dodge 1500 and eventually the Volkswagen 1500, in South Africa as a Dodge fitted with a locally sourced Peugeot engine to satisfy local content regulations, in New Zealand where Todd Motors assembled it from imported kits with around 26,500 units built, and in Iran where Iran Khodro assembled a locally produced 2-door version. And here is the detail that genuinely stops people in their tracks. In Argentina, the platform that first took shape in a Coventry engineering office in the mid-1960s was still in active production under the Volkswagen name until around 1990 or 1991, which means this supposedly forgotten British family car outlived its own factory, its own company, its own brand name, and its own era by the best part of a decade, making it one of the longest-lived British car platforms in the entire history of the post-war motor industry, even though nobody in Britain ever knew it. Imagine now a completely different version of this tale, instead of the dependable family saloon. Imagine a car painted in a vibrant shade of Sundance yellow that practically shouted at you from the opposite side of a parking lot. It would have a completely matte black bonnet, bold side stripes that ran the length of the body, and the words Avenger Tiger lettered across its rear quarters. Because secret number 5 is about the most dramatic and most collectible thing this car ever became. The Tiger, built in 1972 and 1973 by Desidel and the Chrysler Competition Center, which took the standard GT engine and rebuilt it from the cylinder head down, fitting enlarged valves, ported and enlarged inlet tracks, and a pair of Weber twin-choke carburetors of the type you would expect to find on a dedicated racing machine, raising the power output to 92.5 brake horsepower and allowing the Tiger to reach 60 miles per hour in 8.9 seconds and achieve a top speed of 108 miles per hour. Figures that were independently road tested and published, and that beat the Ford Escort Mexico directly in back-to-back comparison. And the Ford Escort Mexico was specifically the car the Tiger had been engineered to defeat in showrooms and on rally stages, which it did, and only around 600 Tigers were made in total across both the Mark I and Mark II versions, and today only somewhere between 25 and 40 are believed to survive in the United Kingdom, making them considerably rarer than many far more famous British performance cars of the very same era, with good examples now valued at between £17,000 and £26,000, numbers that would have seemed completely impossible for a Hillman in 1972. And then there is secret number 6, which is the motorsport story that most people who know anything about the Avenger have half heard but very few know in its full remarkable detail, because Bernard Arnett, a development engineer who had joined the Roots organization as an apprentice at the age of 15, worked his way up through the competitions department, and was personally involved in the road testing of the very Avenger he would later race, took a works Hillman Avenger 1600 GT to the British Saloon Car Championship title in 1974, winning his class on 8 separate occasions across the season at circuits including Brands Hatch, Mallory Park, Snetterton, and Thruxton. And that achievement alone would have been remarkable for what was fundamentally a company car. But the story did not end there, because Arnett came back in 1976 in a Hillman Avenger 1300 and achieved something that had never been done before in that championship. He won his class at every single race of the entire season, 10 victories from 10 races, scoring the maximum possible points total, a perfect championship, and then returned in 1977 and won the title for the 3rd time, cementing his place among only a handful of drivers in the entire history of that championship to win 3 titles, a record built not in a Ferrari, not in a purpose-built racer, but in what was fundamentally a British family saloon that any member of the public could walk into a showroom and buy off the forecourt for everyday use. And the 7th and final secret is perhaps the most human of them all, because the story of how the Avenger ended is not really a story about a car that failed. It is the story of a car that was failed, because throughout its production life the Avenger was burdened by something that had nothing whatsoever to do with its engineering and everything to do with the state of British industry in the 1970s, with the body panels pressed at the Linwood plant in Scotland and then transported 300 miles south by train to the Ryton factory near Coventry for final assembly. A logistical arrangement that was always fragile and became genuinely damaging when the decade's relentless wave of industrial disputes hit both factories, costing the company thousands of vehicles that were never completed and sales that were never made. And when Car Magazine eventually pitched the updated Chrysler Avenger against the Ford Cortina Mark IV and the Vauxhall Cavalier in a major road test, their verdict was extraordinary. They wrote that if any rival manufacturer had made such a comprehensive transformation to one of their products, they would have launched it as an entirely new car. And that level of praise arrived just as time was finally running out, because Peugeot, which had purchased Chrysler's entire European operation in 1978, made the decision to close the Linwood factory in 1981 with no direct replacement model planned. And just like that, 11 years of honest, underrated, quietly remarkable British engineering simply came to an end without ceremony, without fanfare, and without anything close to the recognition it deserved, which is exactly the kind of injustice that makes people who love these cars feel it all over again every time the story gets told properly. Because by 2016 fewer than 260 Avengers remained registered anywhere in Britain, which means a car that nearly 800,000 families once trusted with their daily lives has become genuinely rarer on British roads than many vehicles that history remembers far more kindly. And the Avenger, if nothing else, deserved to be remembered. Did your parents drive a Hillman Avenger when you were growing up? Or did you ever own one? Because these cars and the individuals who loved them deserve to be heard. Please share your story in the comments section below.